Hi, everyone. Welcome to Freebird Spirit YouTube channel. Thank you for swinging by and hanging out with us. And so back by popular demand, and I know she'd give me a dirty look right now.
We I don't have to do the work.
We have Chrys back. And so we are continuing this discussion. We want you to continue this discussion even when we're not here talking and together with you guys. But we want you to continue this discussion in your own, with your own family, with your own friends. Keep this discussion going. So here we are, keeping the discussion going, huh, Chrys? Trying anyway.
The discussion going. Yes, we are.
There's so much, and the more we talk about this, Chrys, the more I feel I don't know, or like didn't realize, or had an understanding, but didn't really put the pieces together. But where I want to go today is, let's start off talking about what is in our face right now. And in our face right now is the story about this 10-year-old who was raped and was 3 days past I guess it's 12 weeks or is it the 15 week and 3 day? It was at 15 weeks. She was 3 days over that. And so she had to travel across the line, the state lines to receive medical care. Now, I know that for a while, the right side was trying to say that the story was made up and so forth. In my mind, I knew that it wasn't made up, but in my mind, what does it matter? You know, this happens every day. Mm-hmm. You're just not hearing about it. You're hearing about one person in the entire United States. This happens all the time. And we talked about this last week when I shared my own stories of working in a home for pregnant teens back then. And, having 12-year-olds in there and so forth. This happens all the time. This story just happens to be in our face. Let's talk about this. Chrys, you have some ideas.
I have some ideas. Yeah. I've got several thoughts. One is that there's some knowledges we don't want. Most of the women who are watching this Zoom or YouTube, I want to say, by the way, last time there were some 40-some comments and they were spectacular.
Yeah.
They were loving. They were, I remember one, trying to remember, her name began with an M. But I remember one saying, I know who you are. I know I'm under your skin. I can feel you. I've been there. I know what this is. Mm-hmm. And it started a conversation. My oldest friend in the world, who I met when I was about 1.5 years or 2 years old, and we've been friends ever since. We've never really had conversations about what we've done. We lost touch for periods of time, but we're back in each other's lives. And she said to me yesterday, I didn't know that you went through that. Mm. And I didn't, and it was, other stuff. So, and I looked at her and I said, but you have stories too. And what we do in our sort of dailiness is we just put one foot in front of the other and keep going. And forget. We forget. We don't dwell on it. We don't talk about it. That was then. I probably wasn't the same person. But it's so powerful to get with people you know or don't know and say, tell me your story.
Yes.
And so that's what I think you started with this, with Let's Discuss, is that we're telling each other our stories. And at the same time, sharing some of what we've learned from those stories. And I think It was certainly happening to me. In one of my first jobs, this man kept taking me out to lunch and saying to me, don't you want an older man to break you in? I was 18 and he was, clearly like in his 50s or something, and a big shot. And finally he tried something and I ran, and I never went back. I never called. I never quit. I just ran. I never told another soul. And then, those stories are there. They're all of us have had them. And so, fast forward years later, I'm teaching gender, and I have to teach students that 1 in every 3 women is sexually abused in her lifetime. And when you stare into the faces of 18 to 20-year-olds and tell them the truth about that, it's hard. It's not easy. I used to have to show a couple of films, and I'd say, if this is too much for you, you can wait outside the room and come in when it's done. I did a lot of that. But the real kicker was how many students would show up in my office, several of them in fetal positions, about having been sexually abused or raped by classmates. So, and innocent stories. I went with this boy to pick up a beer keg, and he was a friend of a friend's, and so I thought it was okay. And then he assaulted me. This notion of safety goes out the window. But I think if you remember that when the priest thing happened in the thousands, that was so shocking, because we wanted to believe that these were the people carrying the messages of spirit and didn't do stuff like that. And it took the lid off. And then I think going through this era of politics has taken the lid off completely. And so now we thought we had made some strides, and we thought that with the passage of Roe versus Wade and states that don't allow marital rape anymore. And I mean, you can go through a whole huge array of laws about reproductive rights. And not just reproductive rights, the right to just be who you are. I mean, gay marriage, it's like, well, that's a separate topic. We'll talk about that later.
That'll be, yeah.
That'll be the wedding book.
Yeah.
But no, we're not doing that today. But I want to turn you all on to this woman that I found just recently. Her name is Melissa Murray. She's at NYU. She's an endowed chair at NYU. She's African-American and absolutely drop dead brilliant. And what she's done is tracked the history of how the men who ruled this country, the white men of European descent, not Italian, not Jewish, men of European descent, made law after law after law after law to keep women from having any rights whatsoever. What you're watching right now is the same story. What they want to do is dismantle everything that we've gained. Women couldn't hold credit cards without their husband's approval. Women
do you remember when you got your first? Do you remember when you were able to get your first credit card?
Well, I didn't have a husband, so I
right.
Yeah.
So it was a big deal.
Oh, it's a big deal. Yeah. No, but it's also humiliating. I got to ask my husband for permission, and I have to have him sign on a piece of paper that I can have credit. Really? What? Yeah. So, but that history is still in our consciousness. So on one level, we don't want to know these things. We don't want to believe that this is happening. And at the same time, we know that there's a massive sex trafficking industry. It's been there forever. Sorry. And, that 1 in 3 women, what we found in the 70s with the consciousness raising groups was how pervasive it was. And so that gave birth to rape crisis centers, therapists who counsel on those things. But we had terrible secrets. There was a friend of mine who said when she was in college, she was raped by 7 men. She was walking with them from one part of the campus to another, and they all ganged up on her. And she said, I never told anybody because I knew it was my fault. I shouldn't have walked with them. I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. So in addition to the laws and the ways in which, women's behaviors, women's lives have been controlled over the decades, is the internalization. And that's, I think, what we hear. I remember in the 80s, Anita Bryant and her campaign against gays, which I think Ron DeSantis is her reincarnated, but and Phyllis Schlafly, these are the people who tried to defeat ERA. That women don't appear in the Constitution. So every time you turn around, it has to be added. But I don't know if I get, but I'm more concerned about this little girl and whether she's hearing any of this stuff and whether she's getting cared for. This is, and it happens way too often. And that she's already had a period when she's 10. That's another thing to pay attention to. A lot of kids, a lot of incest survivors were too young to get pregnant. So those are the secrets,
Exactly.
And I may have mentioned this to you last time, that when I was in group therapy years ago, there was a woman there whose family owned a very prestigious restaurant in this area. And she told the story of her father and all of their male relatives using her as a child for sex. And I was, and I think I said that last time too, with the store, when people would come in and tell their stories, I didn't know. I knew what I'd gone through, but we all kept it secret.
Right.
We didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
I didn't want you to think there was something wrong with me, and so we didn't tell anybody. So the consciousness raising groups brought it all to the surface. And now you can't shut us up.
Yay.
That's what I think you've referred to. It's just really, and what I said last time is, don't think that we haven't changed anything. We've changed a lot, because those young women, they are not being quiet. And neither should we. I don't know. Can I answer your question?
Yeah, well, and I kind of want to know your thoughts on how it's being addressed by the right wing right now. I know that we talked a little bit about having some feelings about that, how they are going now after the doc, you know what I mean? Like, what is this? Is this all part of what you were just referring to, those, how this whole nation began with those people making the laws? And is it still linked to that?
Yeah.
And why?
Yeah, and I think I was feeling really disturbed this week when I was reading. The most important takeaway right now, well, no, there's not the most important, but critically important, is that we've created a tiered social system. The top tier is white people. And I know people get upset when they hear that. Which is why I'm suggesting you go listen to Melissa Murray talk about the history of these laws. These are laws. These laws have been put in place since the beginning of this country.
So, so what she's saying there is, find Melissa Murray. She has books and articles and all of that such. Okay.
Yeah, I want to make sure. I think one of the pieces, I told you I've been teaching critical race theory for years, but there's an everyday lived reality, and then there's teaching a class, right? The everyday lived reality is that we are not being educated about the history of this country. We are not being educated about the ways in which women have been kept out of the Constitution, have been kept out of equal rights. But more than that, when you start to look at Black women and that history, then you start to see something really, really hideous. And it's right here. It's right here. We've grown up right with it, alongside it, and we don't see it.
It's not scary.
We don't want to see it. We don't want to know that there's bad stuff out there. We don't want to know that there's stuff that has to be fixed. So the first part of fixing is to say, I'm awake. I want to know. I don't have all the tools. I mean, you and I talked about this. I don't have all the tools about how to keep staying in that awakened place. But I know I can start looking for them. And so what I'm encouraging people to do is to look at the stories of there's a great book called The Sisters, the Sisters We've Forgotten, something along those lines. It's about a group of African-American women who survived slavery and went on to create educational institutions for Black girls, Black kids.
The Sisters We've Forgotten.
Yeah, something, I have to look up the title exactly. It's something like this, The Sisterhood We Forgot. Mary McLeod, Mary, I feel having a moment. Okay. Mary McLeod Bethune, yes. They just did her statue in Congress, that hall that has all the statues of famous people. They just erected hers. If you look at her biography, she's got a huge biography and huge amounts of accomplishments. Did we study her? No, we didn't. And she was part of a whole sisterhood of people. But just in terms of headlines, while white women were fighting for their reproductive rights, marital rights, human rights, voting rights, Black women had none of those and were not given any of those. Black women were sterilized against their will. They were raped. Their children were sold. And this continued after slavery. Reconstruction was extraordinarily violent. Congress was putting in one law after another to keep Blacks from having any equal rights anywhere. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can go and look this stuff up. There's a lot written. There are a lot of scholars.
Please look it up. Please look it up and school yourself on this. Important.
Yeah, it's not hard to find. If anybody wants us to sort of list some books, we can do that on the site. But there's just so much. There's so much. And it's stunning how little we know. Mm-hmm. And you said that earlier about stuff about what we didn't know. And there's a part of us that doesn't want to know. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to know that the people around me and in my life once were capable of this, but it's all fixable. And if it's only fixable if we know. So we've got to do that work.
Yeah, we need to pull our heads out of the sand and awaken. And being in that awake place is not always easy. It doesn't always feel good. But we spent too much time trying to keep ourselves safe and feeling safe and good. And look where that got us.
Well,
we can't be empathetic anymore.
Well, you can have empathy, but you can't.
No, I mean, I'm using the wrong word. What's the word?
Sympathetic.
No. When where you're just sitting back and watching everything play out. And you just don't even step into it, and
you sort of go, oh, that's too bad, and then you move on and you do the dishes, okay. I often think of this as it's like the woman who lives in a domestic violence situation and lives with it, right? Lives with it and finds ways to cope and listens to, and then of course we've got all sorts of religious laws as well as state and national laws that say you shouldn't leave your husband if he's being violent. You should learn how to live with that. There's all sorts of sanctions against that. And And then one day you wake up and you say, oh, and you have a limit, right? You've got a moment. It's like, oh, but he's hurting my kid. You know, he's harming my children.
Right.
And maybe I don't think enough about me to get out of here, but I think enough about them that I will. So, you know, it's that kind of thing. It's where we have to awaken in a way that we do something about it. Yeah. There's another piece about awakening that we were talking about earlier.
I wanted to share this book. I found the book.
Which one? The sisters?
Yeah, it's called A Forgotten Sisterhood.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the images I want. Wow. So I want to pull this up for you guys. So hold on just a second while I pull it up. It's not being friendly to me. Let's see here. Okay, we'll do this. And I'm going to go ahead and
It's called Zoom hell.
Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and I'm going to share. So as you can see, this is the book. Okay, you can see it. All right, good. And so it says, for those who are on a small screen, pioneering Black women educators in the Jim Crow South, A Forgotten Sisterhood by Audrey Thomas McCluskey.
Right. And the woman sitting front
are.
center, is the woman that's in the front row in the center. That's Mary McLeod Bethune.
That's who?
Mary McLeod Bethune. That's who they just erected the statue.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Yeah, but you know, you don't know any of these other people. They were totally committed to raising the children and getting them educated. And so that's what they did. They developed all these schools.
Wow.
Colleges, they worked hard to sort of get that worked out. Yeah, when I was, I had the opportunity in my former job. I was working with Tony Blackwell, who's an African-American student life expert. And we became fast friends and started doing programming on campus, lots of stuff. And successful, really great stuff. And remind me the word allies, because that's another piece of this. But we managed to land a grant to bring people into campus. We did these workshops, that sort of where we asked students, students would come in droves, huge numbers, and we'd say, we want you to break up into groups and brainstorm. How would you make this a multicultural campus? And the stuff they wrote was astounding. And of course, it was a very mixed crowd, right? But things that we would never think of, like when I go to the bookstore, there are no Black hair care products. It's like, oh, or I go to buy cards at the bookstore and there are no cards that have people of color on it. Or there's no artwork on this campus anywhere that has people of color. It was one thing after another. And so we said, okay, so what steps should we take? That was the next workshop. So we did a whole set of stuff, and then we transformed the campus.
Wow.
And we developed what we call the Allies Choir, which was anyone could join who wanted to. It was primarily women of color performing a cappella music that was not white, didn't have a white history. The white president at the time was very uncomfortable with that. But the students of color started feeling empowered, started taking control of their environment, and then eventually they pulled our funding.
Wow.
It was remarkable to see that happen.
I mean, I understand that the basis of this is fear, but what are the white people fearing?
Well, I'm not so sure about the word fear. You were talking about that yesterday, and I know that that's a huge factor. I think part of it is that we're so uncomfortable with difference on every level.
Okay.
And I think that in the case of the president at that time, she used to always talk about how she had a black roommate in college. What does that mean?
What does that mean? Yeah.
You know, some of my best friends are black. You know, what does that mean? But
Yeah.
you still pulled the funding.
Yeah.
You know, the moment the students of color said, if you don't help us with racism on campus, we're going to go to the press. She said, okay, these kids are getting too powerful. Right? So that was part one. Part two was we did manage to land a grant, and the grant allowed us to bring women of color activists to campus. So I had I'm laughing because Tony always laughs at me at the look on my face when I picked up Angela Davis at the airport. She got off, and that was when you know, you could walk right up to the gate, and she got off the plane. She's great hair, and she had on black leather jacket and a black leather pants, and carrying a black leather briefcase, and looking so Angela Davis, and my jaw just hit the ground, and I couldn't talk. I could not talk. I was like, okay. And then she's sitting in the back seat of my car. I'm like, sitting in the back seat of my car. And that sort of stuff. So I'll just give you a really quick, funny little story. The next day after we had her there, we took her downtown to get some coffee before she took the train. So Tony and I are standing on each side of her, right? And Angela's standing between us. And we're going to cross the street. We're in Arbor Hill, which is a urban area, very large population of people of color. And it's rush hour. The cars are going this way, like this.
Oh, boy.
All of a sudden, one car slams on the brakes. The other car slams on the brakes. It was almost like the Red Sea parted.
Oh,
and it was
yeah.
two African-American men who recognized her, stopped. We walked across the street. I was like, wow, that's just awesome. It was awesome. But at any rate, so we brought her, we brought Marsha Gillespie from Ms. Magazine. We brought Billy Avery, who was the founder of the National Black Women's Health Project. We brought Mary, I'm going to lose her name. She was chair of the Civil Rights Commission for the United States at the time, and was riding in the car talking to Bill Clinton when the government was being shut down. So it was like Dolores Huerta, who's one of the leading labor activists in the world. And it just went on and on and on. We just kept, and I was just, it was such a learning experience. But Billy Avery, you should look her up. It's Byllye. Avery, she founded the National Black Women's Health Project. Okay. She committed herself to prioritizing Black women's health, especially reproductive health. She was a staunch fighter. She fought for human rights, gay rights, race rights. I mean, but she's very personable, so she would share lots of stories. She knew that we had a project in the housing behind the campus where some people had created an after-school program, and she was like, I want to go see it. I want to go visit it. So we went over, and she came back and she said, well, I've got nothing on them. They're brilliant. It was like, wow, that was nice. But she went, there's a whole lot of YouTubes of her up. Okay. And she's elderly now. She gave a talk at Harvard, I think about 10 years ago, where she honored Ruth Hubbard, who was the first female scientist who showed that the sciences were completely biased.
Wow.
Yeah, she, yeah, and there's a legacy there. This is feminism at its best. But when we talk about how do you make change, how do you deal with the right?
Yes.
And the phrase "we put one foot in front of the other" is never overstated, because you just keep going. And when you see what these women did, Sojourner, that's why I sent you the thing this morning about Sojourner Truth.
Yeah.
My God. Oh my God, her story is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And she just kept going. They took her children away from her. They took her. She was about to marry another person who had been enslaved. These were in New York State. This wasn't in the South.
Right.
And when she finally got free of all that, she fought for custody of her little boy and got him back. She fought in the courts. She wasn't educated. You just see this woman say, "I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna put one foot in front of the other, and I'm gonna tell the truth." So her name was Isabella Baumgarten, but she renamed herself Sojourner Truth.
Oh, that gives me the chills.
Right? So what you have to do when you look at what these right-wingers are doing, which is absolutely violent, absolutely hideous, and old, been going on since the beginning.
So we know the playbook is the deal.
They know the playbook, and they know how to keep you distracted. They know how to keep you paralyzed and how to keep you upset. And as long as you're sitting in that anger and fear, that's what you brought up.
Yep.
And not in that love energy, they've won. They've succeeded.
Yeah.
They'll keep people home from the polls. It's only hope and possibility that keeps people going to vote and keeps people saying to other people, that's not okay.
So we need to use this to our advantage, because we know the playbook.
Yeah.
Because it's already been happening for forever. And so use it to empower ourselves and not stay in that energy of hopelessness and wherever else it takes us. For many of us, it takes us right back into our victimness.
Yeah.
And then we feel stuck there. It's the gamut of things. Let's not allow that to happen this time around.
Right.
There's too many of us that are awake.
Yeah.
Chrys, how do we help others become awake and see what's happening? And we're doing it right now by talking about it.
That's right. That's right.
So,
but we're also doing it in a forum that, I was very aware that at one point you said something about live, and I thought, no. No, because I think that invites the argument. Right. It's one thing when you're doing the other work that you do, because that's not an argument. That's like people asking questions and you're finding answers for them. And this is different. So what we're tapping into is what we're not supposed to tap into.
Okay. Yeah.
We're not supposed to talk about this publicly. We're not supposed to talk about it in a thoughtful way. We're supposed to argue about it. And one of the things I say to myself all the time about politics is that it's somebody else's drama. It's not mine. I don't want you bringing your drama to me. You want to be in that field, go for it. But I'm going to be the voice that says, there's a truth here. There are lots of people. There's a history here that we're still living with this extraordinarily racist history, extraordinarily sexist history. And we're using institutions, which is why I wrote White Weddings. We're using institutions to keep it in place.
Yeah.
So when I say to a 20-year-old, when you hear the phrase, this is going to be the most important day of your life, what am I talking about? Without exception, they'll say weddings.
Wow.
Without exception. So this is when I was teaching at a women's college, right? So I'd say to them, so winning the Nobel Prize and having a baby will not be the most important day of your life, but your wedding will be. Is that what you just said to me? Yes. Now, if we buy into, and so we talked about this last time, it's all about perspective and belief, right? So if our perspective is that the only source for truth is not me. All right, you ready?
Yes.
If we accept that the Bible is our guide, you have to also accept that the first chapter was written 61 years after Jesus died.
Wow.
And it wasn't written in English. It was written in Aramaic, ancient Greek. And it was appropriated by King James, who just happened to be a gay king.
Yep. I
Who
love
had
that.
it rewritten. So whose truth are we going to embrace here? You know, my sister walked out of work yesterday and someone had left a pamphlet on her windshield. And the pamphlet said, "Are you 100% sure you're going to ever go to heaven?"
Oh, yeah.
And Lori and I were both, you know, my mom's father was an evangelical minister, so we're both schooled. And Lori looked at me and she said, "I'm not 100% sure." I said, "No." I said, "Well, here it is. It's quoting from the Old Testament, which was written by Jews." And I bet you the people who wrote that think it's all Christian, or instead they think it's the word of God. So the first place to begin is here. You said it before. You were telling me a story, and the story was about love is a fact.
Love is a fact.
Love is a fact. It's an energy that can never be destroyed. Energy can either be created or destroyed. When you love someone, it doesn't go away. You might not continue a relationship with them. You might say, "This is not healthy for me," but it doesn't mean you stopped living in love.
Amen.
So that's the only way we're going to counter this stuff. Find your truth, find out what the real truth is. Don't be afraid of it, and stay where you say on a regular basis, start with love and stay with love.
Absolutely. Number one, start with
Richard,
love and
go.
stay with one. And I was just thinking, you know, if you want a bullet list of how to continue to kind of awaken this, and it is knowledge, understanding, and it's starting with the history. And that's why we have these beautiful conversations, which I'm extremely grateful for. It's coming from that place of love. And from when you come from that place of love, you want to understand, you want to see, and you're ready to see. So then what's next to see? And what we've been talking about, and right now we're in this women's rights and being taken away, and all this happening right now. But it's important for all of us to understand all sides of this. And that's a women of color as well. The discussion that we're seeing happening, like you said earlier, it's for white women.
Mm-hmm.
There's more to the story, guys.
Right.
And we need to be ready and willing to look at all sides of this story.
Mm-hmm.
And with that brings in the power, because knowledge is power, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's know the whole story,
Mm-hmm.
and be empowered fully to walk together arm in arm.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand right now, we still need to use our platform. We need to still keep screaming out, but it's not going to be loud enough until we have the entire story. And so I just want to encourage everybody to do your research and understand the full story of, and go back in history of women of color, the Black women's story, and history of their fight.
Well, and to also know that with the absence of Roe versus Wade, poor women and women of color are at much more significant risk. They do not have access to healthcare in the same way that a lot of privileged people do. So when you hear activists say the people who are really going to suffer, it's an understatement. You know,
It's an
it's an understatement. When you start reading the stories, slavery stories, you can go on and read Reconstruction stories, go on and read what's happened prior to Roe versus Wade in the book we were talking about, well, there's more than one book, but about the children who were given up for adoption when their single mothers were disallowed abortion. There's huge amounts of history there that expand. That's the other word, expansion.
Expansion.
Right? It's not just awaken.
Yes,
It's
expansion.
become expanded,
Yeah.
right? Right. To evolve, that's what we're here for, you know, to evolve, to expand. And every moment is a moment of expansion, especially when you hear somebody else's life. And I think I mentioned earlier that I wanted to not forget the word ally. You know, you may not,
Ally, yeah.
this may not be affecting you personally, but you can be an ally by talking about it and educating yourself about it. And the only way that minorities have ever, any minority, women generally, or any minority, gays, whatever, has gotten any rights passed, it's because they had allies.
Allies. Yeah.
Right? The vote didn't happen because women were doing hunger strikes and all sorts of militant stuff to try and get people's attention. They had men, powerful men who were their allies, who helped them get it through. So if you're privileged, if you're someone who's in that group, you can be an ally, and you can be an ally by doing the work. Find out the truth. Be your own sojourner truth.
Yes.
Enough already, right?
Enough already.
Enough.
I love that. Enough already.
Yeah.
That's another t-shirt.
You should start your own t-shirt.
I think so.
I think you should. I think you actually wrote down something last time we did.
I think I did. I think
I think you said you were going to make a t-shirt.
For sure.
Yeah.
Enough already. And you know, I just think sometimes I just, you know, or you know, Black women watching white women talk about this, and you know, this whole concept of our rights being taken from us, blah, blah, blah. They look at us and they're like, you don't even know. You don't even know. You know what I mean? But we want to know. So let's link in, let's learn, let's grow our knowledge, because together we're stronger and together we can. And so it's important to know each other's story. I'm reminded, you know, even when I just take a walk, and you do this, Chrys, walking, and we see these little individual homes, and acknowledging that every single one of these homes has their own culture within that home. They have their own story, their own stories of triumph, of sadness, of grief, of whatever. They have, each one of these homes represents their own culture unto themselves. How beautiful is that? And we all live together. Right. But how do we open up and really link in together? How do we link our cultures together without trying to change them and make them into our own culture, right? So that's a whole nother discussion. But
all that happens when you do everything.
Yeah.
You don't do any one thing. You know, that doing these YouTube discussions is one. Doing what you normally do for Freebird Spirit, the chats, that's another. Mm-hmm. You know, and other people are doing a whole variety of things. So there's no one way, but you're linking arms. We did just link arms. We were linking arms. Yeah.
Linking arms.
So we do more than this. We do this too. Yeah.
We do the hugs and we link in.
Yeah.
So let's keep that going. But I'm telling you again, two key things: lead with love, and knowledge is power. So do
And
some
just, and the stories. I think the big piece, I mentioned the workshops that Tony and I used to do. One of the things we did, because we knew there was something seriously wrong, was we put out a message. She was in student life. We put out a message to the students and said, we would like you to write anonymous letters to us telling us where you're experiencing. And we did it with racism. We did it with homophobia, that sort of stuff. We asked them to please don't identify anybody, and please just tell us the truth. So they did. When they got all done, we created these workshops, and they were fish bowls. So we would pick, for the racism one, we picked faculty and staff members who were all white. We put them in the middle of the room in a circle. And we took all the letters and put them into scripts so that they could read them in the round, right?
Wow.
So we started, and we invited, and the place was packed. There had to be 200 students there. So they came and and it's all in a circle, right?
Wow.
Surrounded us. And we called it Allies Against Racism. So they did that. And then they read in the round. And then the two of us would ask them questions like, what pattern did you observe here? Without exception, they said, I had no idea. I had no idea. Why didn't anyone tell us that this was going on? How is it we didn't know? He didn't ask.
Right.
He didn't say, how are things going for you here? You didn't ask. So then what we did was we asked them to, now what would you like to say about it? And they were thoughtful. And then we said, we're going to open it to the floor. And feel free to share your stories. But if you're not an ally on this topic, you're not welcome here.
Wow.
Right? A couple people left.
Wow.
So yeah. And one woman, I remember one woman started to say something, well, and I said, no, if you're not an ally, this is not your conversation. And she left. I was like, okay, good. But that also signaled to the students who were affected that you've got an ally. I'm here to help, right? So we processed it. The students started giving testimony. They're raising their hands. This happened to me. This happened to me. This happened to me.
Wow.
And then it was all done. Tony took the students of color, and I took the white students into separate rooms, and we worked on it. And it gave birth to a whole variety of changes. We did the same thing around homophobia. It was just extraordinary, but when you hear this, that's what I'm saying about stories. That's why I love it when you and I talk about our stories.
Right. Because it brings it into something that we can grab. We love stories. We're humans. We love the stories, and it's relatable, and it brings a feeling and an understanding around a subject. So I just keep thinking about understanding the whole story. I think it's so important. How do we do that? How do we, besides getting on Google and doing some research of the history of women's rights, human rights, and the Black women's struggle, and then we have all the different different groups that have, again, every house that I painted, they all have their own little culture. So it's the same thing. How do we understand everybody's story, and how do we begin? How do we start?
Well, you've made a career out of that, haven't you? I mean, come on.
But I mean, how does any of the family watching right now, is it just learning? And I just know that when you become aware of a story, you can't backpedal out of that story. It's always, you now know. So once you know, it's only forward you can go.
You have to make a commitment to live in truth. I mean, you said to me once that you had to live your truth, and I think we've just gone through a period of time where truth was thrown out the window. You know, when you have a president that lies 50,000 times plus, you know, and you say to yourself, how can we do this and raise our kids to not lie?
It's
I
true.
I was always struggling with that.
Yeah.
How do you have those values with your children when your president hasn't got any of them?
Yeah.
You know, and is on the media all the time. How do you do that? You know, well, the president lies, you know, it's like, I mean, come on. So yeah, you got to live your truth, but you also have to know. I think I mean, there's a reason I became a sociologist, but the real important thing you have to know is that your social world has been organized into institutions. Institutions are organized structures. Okay, so when you think of an institution, you probably always think of something like the IRS or, you know, something that has a building attached to it. But institutions are basically organized social practices. So what we'll talk about another time, which is the wedding thing, is really about how we've institutionalized heterosexuality, how we created it to give men control, how we created the laws that support heterosexuality to make marriage be the site where women and children can be owned and property can be passed from father to son. So when you look at that history and you look at how institutions function, how did they? Here's the better question.
Yeah.
Instead of us asking, how do we do it? How are they doing it? How are they getting away with it?
Oh, there you go.
Right now, when I was in graduate school, and one of my classmates, we were talking on the phone one day about our dissertation projects, you know, struggle. And she said, well, the problem is we keep focusing on the target and not about where the power is. So we keep focusing on the people of color who've been harmed, but we haven't focused on who's harming them and how are they getting away with it. So when you shift the debate to who's in charge,
I love this. Yes.
Which is why white weddings, but who's in charge, how that gets put in place, then you stop them in their tracks from being able to continue in that vein, because we're on to you now.
Right. So it's a whole societal thing though. We're enabling this system.
That's right.
How do we stop fucking enabling the system?
By doing what we're doing. Just
all right.
Name it. You got to name it. You got to study it. You got to understand it. You got to talk about it. And instead of saying, well, I'm not racist, you say, where did racism come from? Mm-hmm. Why is it that Europeans decided that the people who actually kept them alive should get out of the way? We'll have to kill them if they get in the way, or we'll just put them on reservations so that they're under control, and then we'll take all of their rights away. We won't let them have reproductive rights either. We won't have them have rights of citizenship either. You know, we'll do all of that sort of stuff, and then we'll go and do that for you know, bringing in Africans, which we brought in starting in the 1600s, not the 1700s, and you know, so yeah. You know, I try not to get carried away with the size of this because it's massive.
Right. But we need to start somewhere.
We need to educate our children.
There you go.
You need to not be just standing by while public education gets assaulted. You know, the kid comes home, read him a book. You know, there are tons of books out there about all of this, and tons of them are written to kids, you know, and
the schools certainly haven't caught up. I mean, you know, when we went to school, we were reading Dick and Jane. It was all white. Everything was white. People like, and can you imagine your classmates of color sitting there? Everything's white. Like they were over, you know, like literally living in the shadows, like non-people. They weren't anywhere. They didn't see themselves anywhere.
Right.
It's still happening.
I know.
It's better. Like it's getting better in this, but it's not there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a,
We can keep talking.
I know, well, you know, there's a reason we're friends.
Yeah.
Many reasons, actually, but at any rate, I'm hesitant to say this, but there's this thing called ideology. And ideologies are belief systems. It's not any one belief, it's a whole system, right? And you know it really well from what you've been through in your life. So belief systems, when they come into belief, the ideologies are belief systems to manage contradictions, keep power in place. Okay. So so the example I always use is what happened in the South in Jim Crow, right? So here are the white kids are on a school bus and they're going to a nice bricked in building and with new textbooks and heat and all that. And students of color are having to walk to school, often in a one-room schoolhouse with a potbelly stove, use textbooks and underpaid teachers, right? Now, today's lesson, I'm going to teach you a belief system. And today's lesson is liberty and justice for all. We're going to study the Constitution today. What does it say? We the people, liberty and justice for all. Now, here's what the kids are experiencing, right? And here's the belief system you're trying to, and the contradiction is no longer managed. So what that is, that rupture between that, it's also the situation we talked about earlier, about when you wake up to in a domestic violence situation, suddenly the most important day of my life is now, oh, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
So what happens was Brown versus Board of Education, right? They come in and they identify the fact that this is not separate and equal. This is separate and unequal. And they dismantle that and created what we came to know as busing. And it, you know, there's a whole lot of other history, but the other part of that history is that in recent years, the schools are still segregated. Now we do it by neighborhood. If you can't afford to live here,
Right.
then, you know, you can't afford the school. And we fund the schools through property taxes, and who owns property.
Right.
So those are what we call those conjunctural moments. So what you have to do in your own life and with the issues that we're dealing with right now is identify those conjunctural moments and bring them to the surface.
Yeah.
Did that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And the awareness of the systemic issues and the breakdown. You know, they're like, well, we need to give a little. They did bring it up that it's not equal. You know what I mean? So they do a little, but they've already had this other systemic issue where you had the Black families that couldn't buy property. And so, you know, in these areas, I mean, it just is, it's
Well, and then
insane.
there's redlining. I mean, there's a whole huge history around
There's so
racism
many
and property
things, right.
ownership. So yeah, it can
Yeah.
go on and on
We can
and
go
on.
on and on with that. However, hopefully this discussion has just opened up and kind of, oh, I'm a little more aware now. And so my next t-shirt is "Wake the fuck up." You know what I mean? It's time. It's time.
Well, I was laughing at your reference to Dick and Jane after the t-shirt.
Oh, I know. If y'all missed it yesterday, my Dick and Jane t-shirt. Yeah. Regulate Dick, not Jane is what the t-shirt was.
That's right.
And
Yeah. I think what we're watching is really the last throes of patriarchy. I think it's why it's so hideous right now.
it is hideous, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah, it's
Guys,
going
it's
to
gonna
get
get
worse.
worse.
It shifts, but people are going to say, "I've had enough. I've had enough,"
Yeah.
and we're done with this. You have to decide what world you want to live in. One where a small group of people are controlling all of us and keeping us from having safe jobs and and safe living and safe environment and instead say, well, but there's the American dream and I want to make a lot of money. It's like,
we need to break free from this Truman Show we're in.
yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Yeah. What did we say was the other term besides awaken was what?
Did I write it down? I didn't write it down. Shoot.
Awaken.
I wanted to make a t-shirt out of that one too.
Yeah, I know. Awaken. And what was the other thing? I can almost hear a chat right now saying, oh, it's this.
Oh, I know. Someone.
Yeah,
I
it'll
can't
come back.
remember.
It's there. It's in the replay.
It's in the replay, guys. That other term. Anyways, again, Chrys, thank you for this conversation. Can't wait to do this again. And to the family, I hope that you take this conversation and keep it going. Again, you can't backpedal. We can only move forward. So make yourself aware, research, understand, link in, however that is. And Chrys, I'm just giving you a big hug. Thank you for your wisdom and sharing that with us and the willingness to do that and be a part of this change.
Yeah,
awakening.
I have to say, I've gone through this health crisis for 2.5 years, and having these conversations with you has awakened me.
Yeah.
It has. It's like, I think I sent you a text the other day saying I'm on fire. Oh my God. Somebody woke my brain up. Oh, wow. Who knew?
And
But-
so I know some people might not know about your health crisis. Can you just share a snippet for us so we know?
Well, the whole notion of reproductive rights hits home because I went into the hospital in January of 2020 to have a hysterectomy because they found something that was suspicious, and woke up with 52 stitches across the front of my body and having had 5 tumors and had a hysterectomy removed, and then told I had stage 3C ovarian cancer. So my life ended as I knew it.
Yeah.
There's lots of deaths. That's another kind of death.
And we're going to have a discussion on that at another time, but
Yeah. So that was the beginning of a very, very hard period, and anaphylaxis shock afterwards, and then had major organ failure in February and March of 21 from the chemo, and so it's been a long haul, but I'm in remission, so that's good. So it's over. It's 13 months in remission.
and your hair's grown back.
And my hair is growing. Look, I even got a haircut this week.
It looks so good. I like it short. I just do.
You
I'm-
would. You would.
I know.
And I wish mine were long, So, okay, there you are.
That is just a story of a powerful story, Chrys, that you have. And it empowers others just by you saying, this is what I just journeyed through the last 2 years. And but you're now you're empowered. You're allowing it to empower you instead of take you down.
Well, let's have that kind of conversation together on another one so that we can go through that.
We will,
bigger
but I just
way.
needed to say that before we
No,
end
no,
today.
I'm hearing you, and I'm totally there with you. Things happen when you're awakened. You get awakened over and we talked about this earlier, over and over and over,
Over again.
I think the people who subscribe to your channel would love a conversation about awakening.
Yeah, let's do it.
And how many layers it has. And
Yeah.
and I, you made a comment before about I was asleep and then I was awake. And it's like, well, what, how did you know you were asleep? How did you know you were awake?
Yeah.
What happens? But I thought I was awake. I thought I was.
Right. We always do. We always think we are.
Yeah. Well, I'd done so much work. Oh my
Right?
God. I'd
I
done so
know.
much work. I mean, you know, 4 years before that happened, I taught astrosociology because I wanted my students to awaken, right? So, but I wake up in a hospital bed and find out that the doctor has told my former partner now and my sister that I have 5 years to live. And that was the beginning of the end of that relationship, I think. So, you know, that becomes a whole other layer.
Yeah.
But I also got visions while I was lying in that bed. They showed me all of my past lives. They were all sitting on benches. You know, I got to see all of that and found myself reaching out to nurses, and they were taking such good care of me. And I was just say to them,
Nurses.
you know, just come out of yourself long enough to say, so do you have children? They couldn't wait to talk about it.
Yay, nurses. And
They were awesome. When the doctor came in and said, you've got congestive heart failure from the chemo, he left the room. As he was leaving the room, he said, thank you, Professor. It was nice to meet you. I was like, did you just call me Professor? Yeah, I haven't heard that in months, you know.
I know, right?
So kind, right? It was like, oh, it's like a little honorific.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, as he left the room, this nurse came out from behind the curtain, got down on her hands and knees and said, I'm right here for you.
Oh my gosh.
You know, I was just like, wow. And that was the COVID era too.
Wow.
So I think nurses had to step up in an entirely deeper way, and only can imagine the awakening they went through.
Oh.
But that was, so yeah, so, you know, one thing after another through this health crisis. But the point is that every day I feel an awakening. Every day I get an insight. And it's mostly because I'm willing. You know, I don't fight it. I don't hide it. And what you and I've talked about before, I'm learning to love myself better. So that's the key, I think, you know, and it's cliche, right? That phrase, loving yourself better.
Well, I mean,
that's it. But what the hell does that mean?
Right. So we're gonna dive into this. This is so family. If you enjoy these discussions, this is a lead into our next discussion that we'll be having with you all. So
feel free to leave comments and suggestions too. Okay.
Yes. Leave comments and suggestions, and also hug a nurse.
Yeah.
Hug a nurse. All right. So blessings to you all. Thank you for hanging out with us today. I hope it was awakening to you, and we will see you again. We will be together in a discussion again soon. So blessings, and we'll see you all next time. Chrys, giving you a big hug. Lincoln in.